Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session of the Tourette Association's virtual conference. I'm Wendy Wegman, and I'm the Education Specialist here at the Tourette Association of America. Thank you for joining us today for Instructional Teaching Strategies to support students with Tourette Syndrome, ADHD, and anxiety. We want to thank all our platinum sponsors, the Warner Fund and Pharma, as well as our donors and supporters for making this free conference possible. To support educational programming like this, you may visit tourette.org/donate to make a contribution today. During this session, we would be very happy to hear from you and include your voice in the conversation. You may ask questions or share comments using the question panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player at any time. Please use the question panel, the question box, and not the chat panel on this webinar. Thank you. We will collect your questions and address them during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters. Dr. Kate Mills, who is an assistant professor of family financial planning for Oklahoma State University. She's the mom of Kaden from the 2018 A&E show, Raising Tourette. Kate was diagnosed with Tourette Syndrome in her early 20s. Kate is a trained education volunteer and a member of the Education Advisory Board of the Tourette Association of America. Kate has provided numerous trainings for emerging teachers and graduate level marriage and family therapy students, along with her children, Kaden, 14, Slada, 9, and Slada, who also have Tourette. I would also like to introduce Dr. Gretchen Colade. She is a retired special education teacher, having spent the majority of her teaching career teaching students with severe disabilities. She's currently a teaching assistant professor preparing early childhood education pre-service teachers to meet the needs of their future young children in an inclusive classroom setting. Dr. Colade's research interests include increasing the capacity for educators to meet the needs of all students and their families, collaborative team processes, and argumentative and alternative communication devices and systems to support communication of young children with complex communication needs in early childhood inclusive settings. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Special Education from Old Dominion University, a Master's of Education in Early Childhood Education from Boston University, National Board for Professional Teaching Standard Certification in Exceptional Needs in 2001, and renewed the certification in 2011. And a doctorate of philosophy and professional education studies with an emphasis in special education from Oklahoma State University. Thank you so much to both of you, and it is my pleasure to begin our presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Wendy. It's absolutely a joy for Gretchen and me to be here today. And I want to kick us off with our learning objectives. By the end of this session, you should be able to describe how ADHD, anxiety, and executive function needs impact how students with Tourette syndrome learn and interact socially with peers in classroom settings. Additionally, you'll be able to implement and advocate for appropriate instructional teaching strategies to best support students with Tourette syndrome who struggle with ADHD, anxiety, and executive function needs. Sorry, Gretchen, the key takeaways?
And remember, Kate, that I don't see the notes, so can you cover them for me?
I will do it, I'm so sorry.
Don't worry.
Key takeaways from today are that students with Tourette syndrome who struggle with ADHD, anxiety, and executive function needs can succeed in general education classes with appropriate supports. Educators of students with Tourette syndrome who struggle with ADHD, anxiety, and executive function needs need to be able to implement a variety of instructional teaching strategies to best support their students. And parents of children with Tourette who struggle with ADHD, anxiety, and executive function needs must consistently advocate for their child or their children and share ideas for best practices with the educators of their children. Now, research into Tourette syndrome, executive functioning, ADD and ADHD, anxiety, I mean, the topics that we're going to cover today, it's not new and it is quite extensive. The brain is a never-ending source of fascination, but it's about more than the brain, right? It's about more than higher mean impairment, right? I mean, yeah, these diagnoses are rooted in brain activity, tied in with frontal neural dysfunction and susceptibility genes, but it's about the person, the child, teenager, the adult, the person that we need to focus on. Today, we're going to talk about 3 diagnoses that frequently co-occur with Tourette syndrome. Today, we're going to talk about seeing the child before we see a problem. We're going to focus on meeting the needs and finding where the child has a problem and strive to no longer think of the child as the problem. When you are privileged enough to work with a child with Tourette, you are working with a child who interacts with and experiences the classroom in a fashion that is new and potentially challenging to you. That's okay. That's why we're here, to give you some tips and best practices for working with these amazing human beings. Tourette is diagnosed after motor and vocal tics are present for longer than 1 year. But the tics are just the tip of the iceberg. ADD and ADHD are generally diagnosed after identifying a pattern of inattention and/or hyperactivity and impulse behavior lasting at least 6 months. Executive functioning challenges do not result in a diagnosis, but these challenges, as we'll discuss this evening, can be very challenging for a child, a teacher, and a classroom of expectations. Anxiety has numerous faces and diagnostic criteria. Today, our focus will be more in the generalized anxiety disorder area. Gretchen, what would you like to add?
I have said it many times before and will continue to say it again and again. This is such a fabulous visual for all educators and I think parents too, to share with educators, to say, you know, when you're working and supporting my child in a classroom who has Tourette syndrome, it's not just the tics. And what Kate and her family have shared with my pre-service education students is this visual that has left such a profound impact on them, to say, you know, if they were just the tics, and not that tics aren't a lot, that would be a whole different child. But underneath the surface where we don't see it, and so there isn't a physical demonstration of the behavior, there's so much more that the child is struggling with. And when we understand what their struggle is, and that's the key to understanding. This morning, Kate's beautiful daughter talked about patience, and I smiled because as a teacher, I teach my students, you're going to run out of patience. You need to have understanding. And this diagram gives a perfect beginning to the understanding of a child with Tourette syndrome in a classroom, is that we can see all of these other things and we can go, oh my gosh, absolutely, I see anxiety in the child. But you know what? I'd never thought of that as being part of or just, you know, related to the Tourette syndrome. And so I think it's just a fabulous way to start our talk, Kate.
Fantastic. And with this iceberg, this is, of course, available to you in handout form. You can find clips of it on the internet for discussing with family members, teachers, and other people. We're going to go ahead and kick right on in to executive functioning, Gretchen.
All right, very good. Executive functioning is something that we as educators, we study, we read about, we see it in action. And so it's so important for us to kind of sometimes pause and think, what exactly is executive functioning? And we need to understand that executive functioning occurs in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And that develops, there's lots of debate research-wise as to when we finally get to the pinnacle of executive functioning. I will tell you, I just left my husband cooking in the kitchen and I'm not sure he's there yet. So we need to understand that it's always developing. And I think that's the key that we need to be thinking about. And so we need to, as teachers, I know we have a lot on our plates whenever it comes to assessing and state mandated testing. And for goodness sakes, this last year of COVID, we're all, we all have high hopes for the fall. But so when we're preparing for how we're going to teach in the fall, we need to be thinking, how are we going to be supporting the development of executive functioning across the board with all of our students, but specifically with our students with Tourette syndrome. And so bottom line, executive functions are the cognitive ability that control and regulate most of what we do in our daily lives. From the time we wake up and we decide what to have for breakfast or not to have for breakfast, what we wear that day, depending on what we know about the weather, how we interact with our peers when we get to school, where we sit when we get to school, how we handle the morning board work. Executive functioning includes the ability to initiate, plan and organize, set goals, solve problems, regulate emotions, and monitor behavior. Boy, does that not encompass the entire school day? Absolutely, positively it does. Because what we need to understand about executive functioning is it doesn't just have to do with planning and organizing, but also how we handle our emotions when we get overwhelmed, when we have, as Kate's beautiful daughter Slater would say, a bad tick day. How do I handle the emotions that go with that? Can I go take a walk down to the water fountain on my own making that decision myself rather than being told to by a teacher, and then to monitor my behavior so that way I can figure out ways to stay in my classroom and to stay with my peers, but to also figure out how do I adapt and be able to survive in a classroom full of 20 plus children. So that's what executive functioning is. All right, so let's take a look at, and I love this from advantageslearningcenter.com. These are all the different things that go into executive functioning, and it can be really overwhelming, but I hope that you'll take this diagram and hang on to it so that way you can be thinking, how do I help kids in each of these areas? And so we'll start with working memory. And working memory is that we keep key information in mind and we'll use it. Working memory can maybe be a visual up on the board of this is our daily schedule. Here are the big things that we do every day. We as teachers can help with working memory. And what's great about having a daily schedule on the board, and I've even seen a lot of school districts are now requiring that teachers put, like Kate did the review of what are we going to learn today? Teachers are now being asked in strong school districts, what are our objectives today? That's working memory, and that and while I know that as an educator, we all kind of roll our eyes and go, here we go, here's another thing we need to do. But that's what this helps with. It will help our students with Tourette syndrome to go, okay, these are the 3 big things I got to get done today. And hopefully with a schedule like that, and you'll see, that a visual schedule can help with several things with executive functioning. What I loved, I always had a visual schedule in my room every single day, and I would revisit it. Most days it's pretty much, depending on the day, stayed the same. But if you know a fire drill is coming, put the fire drill up there. If you know that there's going to be an assembly, put the assembly up there so that way, and man, now I'm going to be crunched in math because I'm going to have this assembly. For self-monitoring, this is where you meet with a child individually and you discuss, how can I help you be self-aware to how you're doing right now? And can it be a checklist? Can it be something you keep in your desk? Some students I would have laminated on their desk, and it would be a checklist of, I called it the checkup from the neck up, where they would kind of check in, how am I doing? And if it was, I'm really frustrated, then that would key them to say, what are my coping strategies that I can now use because I'm getting frustrated and I don't want to have to go to the next level of emotional dysfunction within a classroom. Planning and prioritizing. Oh my gosh, I'm so sad that we wait until middle school to start teaching kids how to plan and prioritize. My own granddaughter got a planner in 7th grade, and I'm thinking, where was this planner in 3rd grade? We needed it in 3rd grade. And so I think as parents, that's where you may need to develop your own, and then boy, share it with the teacher, because you know what? Your child isn't the only one who needs it or who would benefit from it. But to help them be able to say, you know, out of all the things we got to get done today, what is our plan, and what's going to be the number one that we're going to do? Task initiation is getting started. And you know, I've learned so much from Kate and her family, and certainly, you know, studying about anxiety, that one of the things anxiety does is it stops us. It makes us sit on a couch and turn on The Handmaid's Tale. That's what I'm binging right now. Horrible show. And I keep wondering why I'm watching it. But you know, that's what happens, though, is that we sit and then we don't get started. And so how do we, you know, do the next thing? I have a screensaver that says, do the next thing. Don't think about all of the things, but do the next thing. Could we not help a child do that? Certainly organization goes with planning, prioritizing, and then working memory. How do I keep organized? That, and I hope as a teacher, one of the things you have is, and maybe it's individual for a child, or maybe it's for the classroom, that they have a I'm not finished yet box. That they put things that, you know what, it's time to go to PE, but I'm not finished yet. Can I put this in there? That way I know I'm going to go back to it. Do you see what I'm saying? That helps us be organized. That's the spot I'm going to go back to whenever there's free time. Certainly impulse control. I always smile with impulse control, because impulse control, I want us to think about, you know, in life, hopefully we have a ready, a set, and a go. With impulse control, sometimes all we have with a kiddo is go. And so that's where we need to watch our kids. We need to look for that moment before the go where we can interrupt and give them something to think about, and or help them be able to do it. Do you see where this would be the self-monitoring thing? You could do the ready, set, go, and say, when you're ready to go, have you readied and have you set? Emotional control, keeping feelings in check. This is so important, especially for our young children. We need to bring them up, always thinking about, how am I feeling? In this morning session, you know, Kate talked with a parent about, you know, how do you help a child self-advocate? And one of the things she talked about is sitting down as a parent with a child, and certainly as a teacher with a child, to say, not during the tick, and not during the bad time, but when things are calmer, because again, that's when they're in their prefrontal cortex and can start thinking about thinking, that's where our kiddos can say, you know, when I'm like that, this is how I feel. And when I feel like that, this is what I think I need to do to stop feeling like that. And then finally, flexible thinking. And boy, I hope as I went through all of this, all of us went, yeah, I need that too. Because we are all human beings. And flexible thinking. Okay, you know what? I've worked my entire career with students who have either on a 504 or an IEP. And you know what? We are all so much more alike than we are different. And none of us deal with change well. None of us do. We all need to. And so to be able to say to a child, here are our options. When we have this behavior, here are our options. And for everybody, it looks different. And that's where the relationship between the parent and the child, or the teacher and the child, and then most importantly, the child themselves, to become a self-advocate, can say, when this happens, here are the options I need. So that's what executive functioning kind of in a wheelhouse looks like. All right, so with struggles, what we need to understand is that struggles with executive functioning is common in students with ADD, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, and Tourette syndrome. And the thing is, you know, I always joke that when I have time to go get a pedicure, I never tell anyone when I'm getting a pedicure what I do for a living, because everybody has somebody they want to talk to me about. And the answer I always say is, when you know one child with Tourette syndrome, you now know one child with Tourette syndrome. You know, I have grown up the last couple of years with both Slada and Caden. They are very different children with Tourette syndrome that would present very differently in a classroom. And it has much more to do with who they are as people than their Tourette syndrome. And so we need to understand that while it, you know, I almost, you know, I used to say, you know, let me meet the student first. I'm not going to read their file. I just want to meet the student and get to know them. Tell me who your favorite team is. What do you do on the weekends? You know, when you have some free time, do you go outside? Do you stay inside? Do you like Minecraft? Do you like going in a creek and catching toads? What do you like to do? Tell me who you are as a human being. The Little Prince says, prove your existence to me. You know, and that's what I want to know, because the struggle with executive functioning as we went through that wheel looks very different for each child. And you know, I almost hate to tell you all this, but there's no one solution. And that, I think, is where our struggle is educationally, is that we want that solution. You know, I have taught guidance in classroom management for the last 6 years. And I will tell you, every year, the students they want that checklist. They want that chart that works for everybody. And my standard statement always is, does it work for everyone? And they're like, oh, no, it doesn't. Well, then it's a meaningless strategy. And what you need to do, it all comes down to relationships with the child. And bottom line, it requires the student's development. Notice what it says there on the slide, that it requires the student's development of a unique set of coping strategies. And it's our job as educators and parents, which is why Kate and I make such a great team, to help kiddos figure out what are their coping strategies. And then finally, relationships are the key. It requires that the educator develop a strong relationship with their students to best understand the needs, the struggles, and also the beauty of each student. All right, so we'll talk real quickly about some strategies. And I love this. I love it. Can you tell I love visuals? And so again, I've talked about daily schedules. Daily schedules are so important. To write homework in the same spot. Now, this can go up on your board, that this is the homework that's due for tomorrow. And then do you see where the board should match their planner? So that way they write it or dictate it into, you know, we talked this morning, and certainly on the iceberg, you saw that some students with Tourette syndrome have handwriting issues. And you know, we live in a world of assistive technology. And so could they not text it to themselves? Could they not text it to their parent, who helps them be able to then, you know, be the scribe to write down, when you get home, here's your homework. Teach and practice routines. All right, you know, once again, we are all routine oriented. Have any of us ever woken up late for work and then suddenly you don't have your routine? Absolutely. We don't do well with that. Same with our kiddos. And that's where I'm telling you, for educators, what I highly suggest you do is get on, you know, be really good friends with your school secretary. Figure out who is in charge of the school schedule for fire alarms, for tornado drills. Certainly there are some things we can't plan for, but if you know it's going to be planned, then, you know, help your students be able to know this is what happens when we have this occur. I think mini deadlines are a key to life. When we say to a student, and by mini deadlines, I mean, even if you're giving 30 minutes. This morning, Kate asked for a mini deadline this morning in our 90-minute session. At the 1 hour and 15 minutes, somebody pop in and tell me I got 15 minutes left. That's a mini deadline. And that's what we all thrive on, is tell me where I am in life and what I need to do next. For a teacher, even at the college level, I try really hard to give mini deadlines throughout the semester, and then they have to put it all together in a big project at the end, but it's so much easier because they've done all of the steps up until then. Certainly, we need to integrate teaching executive functioning skills within the content. So when you go back to the wheel and you look at all of those different sections, You need to then, if you're teaching a social studies lesson, you need to teach organization. You need to teach planning and prioritizing. You need to teach all of those. We need to explicitly state when important information is shared. I love as a teacher whenever I say, this will be on the test. Boy, because suddenly everybody sits up in their chair, pops their pen, and starts writing. And that's what we need to say. And that in education is called the big idea. Whenever I teach my students to make lesson plans, the first thing I ask is, what's your big idea? That if they take away nothing else, what is the big idea? What is the important information you want them to do? Give organization time at the end of class. I hope that we all, as educators, plan the last 10 minutes of take a deep breath, everybody get organized. Because you know what? Some kids aren't going to need that time, so they're going to fiddle fart around, or they're going to doodle, or they're going to chat with their friends. But for our kids who need to be able to say, I got to make sure I got my book, I got my planner, I got my pencil, I got what I need to go to the next class, that's what we systematically plan to allow kids to be organized. Do you see where when we talk about what executive functioning is and that it's teaching organization, well, by golly, it's kind of like teaching reading. If a child has a problem with reading, we assess and we say, do they have problems with phonological awareness, with phonemic awareness, with comprehension? Let's figure out what it is, and now we're going to teach to it. Well, now we're telling you all, kiddos with Tourette Syndrome have challenges with executive functioning. So instead of saying they're just always disorganized, now we're saying teach it. Teach it. And so give time checks during working sessions to say, at this point, this is where you should be. We need to reduce distractions around the room. This comes down to your students. Talk to your students about, what do you find distracting? What I always found distracting in my classroom, and in fact, in my home office, I have lights. I have, actual lamps. My students 100% would say the lights, the fluorescent light bulbs bug them. I never use them then. I had lamps all over my room, and I was lucky enough to have a lot of natural light. To give brain breaks throughout the day. And again, this goes to the relationship with your student. A brain break to Kate might look very different than a brain break to me. And so we need to ask kiddos, what's a brain break for you? And so when I say let's take a brain break, that doesn't mean throw up. There's a thing called Go Noodle. If you have never done it, please go look it up. It's for kids who need movement. But you know what? I always challenge my student teachers, and I say, watch the kids during a Go Noodle. Who's not doing it? Because if they're not doing it, it's telling us they don't need it. That's not the brain break for them. Is a brain break for them pulling out a sketch pad? Is a brain break for them pulling out a book that they've been reading? Is a brain break for them just walking to the water fountain and coming back? Do you see what I'm saying? So when we say give a brain break, don't think one size fits all. We need to stock a classroom office. There's a story, I encourage you all to Google it. It's called Give Them the Pencil. And it's a horrid story about the perspective of a child who doesn't have pencils at home. And comes to school and he can't do his work because the teacher won't give him his pencil. Or for goodness sakes, the teacher makes him take his shoe off and give her a shoe. What do we do? Would you ever do that to an adult? Of course you wouldn't. Have a classroom office stocked with everything they need, so that way that's not a worry for our kiddos who, number one, lack the organizational skills to make sure it's in their backpack. And then, for goodness sakes, let's not even go into, which is a whole nother session, students who live at or below the poverty level. All right, and that they don't have those things in their lives. And if you ever need help with grant writing, write me, because I'm a grant writing queen. And then finally, we need to let kids work through their challenges. We need to say, okay, I'm here too. Let's work on what's a brain break. Let's teach you how to be self-advocate. Let's teach you how to get organized. But then to allow them to struggle and go, wow, this time you didn't get organized at the end of class. What can you do next time? How can I help you? Or maybe what can you do? So, all right, I have just a couple of other quick suggestions that I think are fun ones to share with you. about how we can embed executive functioning skills in your classroom. And I hope what happens, you know, I know there's just this huge debate of how kids have fallen behind. And I want us to all put that to the side. Our kids haven't fallen behind. They have survived. And I hope they have thrived within the bubble that they've lived in. But so I am all about games. Games teach kids so many skills. And it teaches everybody. And I think, you know, a key with our kids with Tourette syndrome is that they need to, games level the playing field. Games say, let's all follow our interests, because certainly that's what we need to do, is to have, I would have game days every Friday afternoon. I wouldn't stop instruction. I would say it was semi-structured instruction, and they were games, and we would work on executive functions. And that's how I would write it up in my lesson plans with my objectives, is that there were social skills being learned and then executive functioning skills being learned. Never had a problem with my administration to argue with me that it was not time very well spent. And so certainly the game Blurt is fabulous. It is a game where you blurt out things. Again, remember how we talked about impulsivity? This is a fabulous game to talk to kids about ready, set, go, because while they are going, they have to be ready and set in order to win. Scrabble is a fabulous one. And that, again, these are games that you cannot just set up and walk away. You have to set up and enjoy it with them. You need to model. You need to, for Scrabble, be able to set, you know, kind of walk around and be the helper, or pair kids up that maybe, and especially, you know, when you have kiddos who are so bright with something. I mean, Caden is a Minecraft fiend. And so to have a Minecraft table, can you see where Caden would be the leader at that table? And that would be such a great opportunity for him to develop relationships with kids who really want to do well with Minecraft, but don't have the skills Caden does. And then of course, Pictionary is so much fun to play. And this is where you learn kids who have great drawing abilities. And so for our kids who have great artistic abilities, this is where they can shine. Okay, and I've shared, Kate's gonna laugh at me, but Jenga gives me anxiety. I don't like Jenga at all. I had Jenga in my classroom because I had students who were Jenga king and queens. Not me. I would have to walk away. It would make me so nervous. But Jenga also, though, if you think about it, is a planning game. You have to plan what you're going to take, and then you have to put it up at the top. And then the game Freeze. Freeze is a perfect game for kiddos to do, to then again do ready, set, and really when freeze, stop. And so I love games. Please, please, please add games to your list. All right, so I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you. And I was so excited to see this chart that Gretchen had for talking about executive functioning in the classroom. And so I wanted to bring it back and talk about it from the parent perspective. And I know that one of my struggles with my kids is a lack of working memory. Now, when I was a child, I didn't have challenges with executive functioning, at least that I can recall, or that were brought to my attention. I was also the queen of the to-do list, knowing that if I didn't write it down, it wasn't going to happen because I wouldn't remember. I had no idea why I wouldn't remember. I just knew that I wouldn't. And I remember triple booking myself one time in high school, but somehow got it all done thanks to the to-do list. But it wasn't until early adulthood, particularly in my 20s, when my working memory for personal situations really started to suffer, and suffer greatly. I would pull up to my house and think about what I needed to do when I was taking the key out of the ignition and getting ready to go in. I would tell myself I was going to go in, hang up my coat, do X, and do Y. That's it, literally 3 things. And then I would walk into the house, not even a full minute later, I'd forget to hang up my coat, and I'd forget to do steps X and Y, and boom, we got chaos. I constantly forget that my kids have the same struggle, and that I can't always ask them to do a list of 7 things all at once. Prioritizing tasks for children and teenagers with Tourette can really be a challenge, especially if you want something done in a particular order. Remember, Tourette brains see things differently, and it's sometimes very difficult to put things in order. And that ties in with my third point of organization. Asking a child or a teen with Tourette to clean their room, the refrigerator, the living room, and so on and so forth, when it looks like utter chaos, or even if it's just mildly messy, is really not going to get you anywhere but frustrated. It is very difficult for children and adults with Tourette, ADHD, and other assorted diagnoses to make sense of the chaos. In the classroom, telling a neurodiverse child to do something with a time limit, or when you are done with this, finish other work, if they have multiple assignments left, well, there doesn't always seem to be a way through the chaos to the neat, sorted, organized final product. It may take very simple instruction, one thing at a time. And, it can be difficult to see where to start and the best way to attack an assignment. It's also difficult to remember everything that needs to be done. And no, asking them to create a to-do list doesn't actually result in a to-do list in most cases. Trust me on this, please, because I've been there and I've done that. The Tourette brain can often be likened to 30 super bouncy balls. You know, the ones that you get and you slam them down and they bounce to the ceiling and then all over the place? It's like that. And it's difficult to sift through that kind of chaos to get to the organization stage. There's always so much going on up here at once. Now, I will confess, I'm not a great housekeeper, desk keeper, office keeper, not because I don't want a neat and visually pleasing office, but because in my brain, it's kind of like, well, do you want me to get the work done? And do you want me to build the relationships? Or do you want me to have a neat, organized area? And it's a point of pain for me. And please, and I'm going to tell you why, but please never, ever, ever, never, ever do a messy desk dump like my 4th grade teacher was famous for. Not only did she lose an earring that my grandmother gave me, but it was humiliating coming back from a weekend more than once to find my desk on its side because I had a messy desk and she had dumped it everywhere. Was I an A student in advanced reading and math? Yes. Did I get along well with my classmates? Yes. Was I an age-appropriate leader? Also, yes. I had no idea at the time that my struggle with organization would carry through to adulthood. Heck, I've been on the receiving end of snide and rude, frankly, comments recently from people in positions of power because my office appeared messy to them. Now, I could put my hands on whatever I'm looking for at just about a moment's notice. Less than 90 seconds, I'm going to find what I'm looking for. Is that not fast enough? So yeah, it's a little touchy for me. And I'm not suggesting that it's a skill that students don't need to learn, but how they learn it and the pace at which they learn it needs to be determined by them, not as some sort of preconceived notion that things have to look or be a certain way. Everything that is on the executive functioning chart, my children struggle with or have struggled with at home or in school. And stress and anxiety exacerbate tics as well as issues with executive functioning. These are some of the challenges that increase chaos in the classroom. Our children are not bad children. They aren't bad actioned children. Their brains just function very, very differently. Starting the day with deep breathing and integrating relaxation techniques during the day can be very beneficial. And for all students, everything that Gretchen just shared is appropriate for everybody in the classroom, regardless of whether they are neurotypical or neurodiverse. Practicing emotional control while dealing with some of these other executive functioning challenges means that I need to have some tools available. Yes, for me, but even more so for my children or for your students. Where can they go to sit quietly, relax, and not have to process so much? What does that mean in terms of having things available? My son is touch sensitive. My daughter sometimes just needs to clear her head. So what options do we have to allow the child to basically self-soothe with something that will help them get back on task and back on track? You may experience an overwhelming amount of interrupting when you are working with a child that has Tourette and ADD or ADHD, and that is because part of the Tourette iceberg is disinhibition. speaking up at times and saying things that are just off in terms of timing, like interruptions. But sometimes we just have to get it out. Just have to. It's entirely likely that if we don't get it out to someone who can hear it, that we'll probably forget it. Do children need to learn that interrupting is rude? Absolutely, without a doubt. But I encourage you to talk with the child. Let them know that you have noticed that they interrupt and give specific examples. Let them know that you want to hear from them if they have any ideas for ways to decrease the amount that they interrupt. Ask them what's going on. Why is it so important that they be heard right then and there? Why do they struggle to take their turn? And yeah, you may get the classic, I don't know, but encourage them to think about it and talk to you when they figure it out. Let them know you want to understand so that you can practice better listening skills when it is your turn to listen. Empower them to help you. Children want to be heard. I think we all do, but children definitely want to be heard. And children with impulse control challenges want to be heard and feel that they have to be heard at a specific time. Help them by slowing down your rate of speech and addressing their concerns. Gretchen, I'm going to go ahead and kick it to you for ADHD kickoff.
All right. I think that certainly this is a topic that has been discussed for years and years in our educational field. However, I think that it is definitely one that we need to continue to have this conversation over. And so when we look at attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and of course we have ADD without the hyperactivity, and then ADHD. We need to understand that there is ongoing inattention. And so to be able to remember how with executive functioning that we need to help kids focus in on what's the important part. And we need to be very cautious about, sometimes our kids, it's not necessarily that we say they're not paying attention to anything. It's that they're paying attention to everything. And so that's where we need to be having the conversation with students to say, what is distracting to you? How, when you need to focus, what do you need? Do you need a carol? Because if you do, we're going to help you design one. You're going to get to design your own carol so that way you can be successful, because I know you are one of the brightest students I've ever met. Because, have you seen that meme that says, my teacher believed in me and so did I? And so if we believe in them and we teach them, this is what you need. Now, I want you to kind of look around. This is my home office. Can you tell that I love to have stuff up on the walls? I love lots of things. And I would take criticism from people, kind of walking in Kate's shoes over, are you distracting students? I always talked with students to say, where there were parts of my classroom that were deserts of visual stimulation, so that way students could be able to be successful. Now we need to understand that ADHD can include hyperactivity and impulsivity and extreme distractibility, just as I was saying. And then high energy. One of my very favorite students in the entire world was whenever I very first started teaching. He was in my second year of teaching, and he had ADHD. And this was, okay, I'm dating myself. This was back in the 80s, where we drugged kids. That's what we did. And he would come to school and he would sleep so hard. And finally I said to his parent, do me a favor, don't drug him before you send him to school, because I can't teach him. I can't teach a kid who's sleeping. If you need it, if you need it at home, do what you need to do. But for school, please don't give him anything in the morning. We'll have it in the nurse's office just in case he thinks he needs it. This was a middle schooler. And so you know what we did, and I believe it or not, he and I would go run every morning. We'd run a mile on the track together. I was in the best shape. I've never done that before, and I never did it again. I was kind of sad I didn't have another student that needed that type of movement, but he and I would go run on the track for a mile before school, and then we'd use lots of deodorant and come into school and get to work. I was very fortunate. I had an assistant teacher who was able to cover the rest of the kids, so that this one student, because you know what, his distractibility and high energy was so disruptive that we got very little done in the classroom unless we did that. And so do you see where I think that it's so important for us to balance? If a kiddo has high energy, they need movement. There's a thing called proprioceptive needs. Proprioceptive needs are big muscles, and we need to be able to use them. They can be more disruptive than tics. And so when we look at the iceberg, that's below the iceberg. That's below the waterline, isn't it? But we need to be aware. And so, and now, Kate, I'll turn it over to you, because this touches my heart. You know, I've learned so much from my friendship with Kate.
And I have received, I'm sorry, Gretchen. I've had, conversation about this, with Gretchen, and we've done this presentation before, and she's encountered my children in, and the ADHD can be very disruptive, and it can get in the way even of a presentation that's been organized to talk to emerging teachers. The ADHD doesn't just turn off, and I said maybe because I was trying to be polite, but it is typically more challenging than the tics. And I've received a fair number of complaints about my son's tics in particular, but a greater number due to his ADHD. And as I look back to pre-K and kindergarten in particular, I mean, just the number of apologies that I owe my son is overwhelming. There's so many ways I should have advocated for him, but I didn't know that I was viewing things through the wrong lens. Red, yellow, and green. In a classroom, assigning a color for a child's behavior is ableist and should not be allowed. It allows the teacher to feel good about some predetermined acceptable guideline for rating a child's behavior. Well, as Gretchen just gave an example, is there something a little bit different that you can do to help that child get to a point where they can focus even for a small portion of the day? And yes, absolutely, children need to learn to abide by rules and follow instructions, but understanding that sometimes it is outside of the child's control is imperative. My son, particularly when he was younger, and my daughter now, are absolutely go, 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 go. Attention and excitement, jumping from one topic to the next, speaking at the rate of speed of light, and I do the same thing. There's an inability many times to sit still and just be, whether to read or play quietly. That can sometimes be non-existent. And of course, there are exceptions. Caden is a prolific reader and always has been. Slada used to be able to play quietly, and as she is getting older, it's getting harder and harder for her to do that. And so we are trying to figure out things that work. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been told that I make someone tired, or that, I've heard somebody else say, oh, that kid just makes me so tired, or just being around you. And these have been said directly to me, just being around you exhausts me. Don't do that. Done. Don't do that. It's mean. And you will have children that are extra energetic. Celebrate that energy. Use that to help you do better. Don't poke at them because it's not funny. Gretchen, back to you for more ADD and now with executive functioning.
Absolutely. And so our common challenges that link up with executive functioning. And I think, a key with this slide is this. When we see a kiddo with impulse control issues, I don't want us to think they just don't have any control. Rather than, why do I not anticipate that impulsivity is going to be one of my challenges? And so now, once again, remember how I talked about reading? When there are challenges with reading, we break it down. We're good at that. And we teach exactly what they need so they can be successful. But boy, when they have a challenge when it comes to impulse control, emotional control, self-monitoring, and planning and prioritizing, we say they're just a bad kid. They don't get recess today. We're going to hold them in from recess. We're going to sit them out in the hallway. One of my favorite stories is I had a student whose sibling had problems with ADHD, and my student and I were out doing an errand, and we passed by his sister's math classroom, and she was sitting out in the hallway, and I'll never forget, I said, okay, is everything okay? And she just crossed her arms and she goes, well, I dang sure wasn't interrupting the class the way they thought I was. And I thought, you know what? That's a teacher who has no other skills in their toolbox for understanding that this is a kid who, she's in math class. She should not be in the hallway. She needs to be in math class learning. And instead, the teacher gets frustrated. So do you see what I'm saying? That when we have common challenges and we recognize that impulse control, emotional control, being able to de-escalate, Kate brought up breathing. I am all about breathing, and also having, in our model classroom at OSU, I had a comfy corner for adults, and it was always being used by college students. That we need to have a comfy corner or a safe corner, and we need to have students help develop it, so that way, Kate mentioned that Caden loves to read. Boy, there better be some good books over there. And that, Slada has shared she likes to walk to the water fountain and back. That we need to understand, what do they need for emotional control, and teach that. For self-monitoring, how do I know when it's coming? How do I know when I'm past that point and I really do need to take a break, and I need to go talk with a teacher I trust, or go talk to I hope that you value and develop relationships with school secretaries. Send your student to go talk to the school secretary and have her have their favorite snack in her desk, so that when they go, that if they need a snack, to just sit for a few minutes and then send them back, that it's not a punishment, but it's one of the ways to self-monitor. And then certainly planning and prioritizing. And then I love, Kate put this visual in, and again, I'm such a visual person, but the race car brain, that our kids are going at that fast of a thought process. And here we are, we're kind of the Charlie Brown teacher in the background, the want, rather than, okay, I can see in your face, you are going a mile a minute. Stop. Let's take a deep breath. Tell me when you're ready to talk. I'll come right back to you if you need me to. Do you see what I'm saying? To figure out what we can do to help.
And Gretchen mentioned sending the child to the school secretary to have that favorite snack. What Gretchen's talking about, and I just want to make sure that we make this very clear, is not the teacher sending the child, but the teacher knowing that when the child needs to leave the room, that there is a designated safe person. Gretchen, I'll go ahead and let you relate that.
Yes. Thank you, Kate. And this is, again, I hope as teachers that we are always learners, or we're relearners. I as was mentioned in my bio at the front of this session, I'm a National Board Certified teacher. And part of National Board certification is doing reflection. And the reflection question is always, what did you learn, or what did you relearn? And what I have relearned from my relationship with Caden is this. And you're right, Caden, so thank you so much, because this is such a key part of, and the reason I bring up the school secretary is I had a school secretary named Gigi, who there were several of my students who had ADHD, and when they needed a break, they would say, can I go see Gigi? And I would find something they needed to bring to Gigi, and send them up to Gigi. It was not me saying. And that's what Caden shared in one of his talks with my pre-service educators was, you can't tell me when to take a break. It's kind of like, as an adult, have you ever had somebody say, you need to calm down? Yeah, I love Kate's face. And I'm sure everyone else that's on here, all 112 of us are going, oh yeah, that did not work. That don't tell me I need to take a break, because maybe I don't need to take a break. Maybe what I need to do is do some deep breathing and do another one of my strategies. Not that taking a break isn't one of my strategies, but allow me to have the power. Unmet needs are huge with our kiddos with Tourette syndrome. We need to identify what the unmet need is. And one of the unmet needs can be power. Do I have the power to make a decision for myself? And just because you're annoyed with me, adult, teacher, does not mean that's what I need. And when you take over that power, you completely destroy that strategy, because now I'm mad. I'm going to stomp up the hallway. I'm not going to be nice to Gigi. She's going to say, don't send him here anymore. Do you see what I'm saying? And so Caden reminded me that it is so important for me as a teacher to say to the Cadens of the world, when it is my perspective that Caden is, emotionally or tick-wise or whatever escalating, to say, Caden, what do you need right now? Not, Caden, you need to take a break, dude. Hit the hallway. Okay. And so, and Slada, has shared she likes to walk to the water fountain sometimes, but I bet Slada doesn't like to do that every time, And so again, that we say to the students when they're having these challenges, what do you need? Because do you see where that teaches self-advocacy too? And it empowers the child to say, this teacher gets me. Mm-hmm. This teacher is willing to listen to what I need right now and then be able to make some decisions. So thank you, Kate, very much, because that is the key to any strategy is this what you need right now?
And modeling behavior, I think, is a lot of what it comes back to. It's absolutely key. And as you respond to somebody, whether at home or at school, who seems to be racing at what appears to be the speed of sound or the speed of light, taking a deep breath yourself and then speaking slowly, not condescendingly, but slowly. When you speak slowly and clearly, you enunciate more thoroughly. When you enunciate more thoroughly in a calm way, because there's a difference between angry enunciation and calm enunciation, those of us who struggle in this way can better hear what you are saying, and we will naturally slow down in many cases, in most cases, and match that, because we will see that you are relaxed. And if you are practicing your active listening skills, when you carefully restate what we had to say, it will allow us to hear it in a slower way, which will then help our brains process what's next or what is coming. ADD and ADHD, let's go ahead and talk about that, Gretchen.
Okay, and so again, frequently occurring, almost 80% of children with Tourette Syndrome have ADD and ADHD. Okay, so should any of us be surprised that they have challenges with ADD and ADHD? In fact, what we need to do is say, you know what, I'm ready. Bring it on. Let's take this on. Let me get to know you as a human being. Let me figure out what makes you tick. And when I say tick, I don't mean tick. I mean, what makes you a human being? Do you like Minecraft? If Caden were my student, I would have to learn Minecraft. Because that's what I would have to do so he and I could have a conversation. Had a student with ADHD who loved the Washington Redskins. I don't do football. I don't understand it, but boy golly, every Monday morning in football season that year, I could have a conversation with this kiddo about the quarterback and the bad play, and I thank goodness for Google, so I didn't have to watch the game myself. But do you see what I'm saying? That we need to understand that we need to expect it. Treatments for ADD and ADHD can make tics worse. Okay, number one, as an educator, it is not our job to tell parents their kids need to be medicated. And in fact, what you need to understand about educational law is this. If you tell a parent as an educator, speaking from the educator chair, that their child needs medication, you have now signed the school up to pay for it, because you've now made it an educational need. And so it's not our job. It's not our job. Can I say that again? It's not our job. Now, is it our job that if a parent, remember my student who was on medication, it was my job to give feedback. The doctor asked me for feedback and I wrote and said, get him off of it while he's with me. I can't teach somebody who sleeps all day. Let me deal with the high energy and the impulsivity issues and all of the things that go along with him, because that's who he is as a human being, and I can work with that. But so we need to understand that once again, remember how I said at the beginning with strategies, that there isn't an easy strategy. There isn't a magical pill. Very rarely in our lives is there a magical pill. And so please stop looking for one, or hoping for one, or thinking if that kid just was medicated, my life would be so much easier. In fact, what research indicates very strongly is that treatments for ADD and ADHD make tics worse. And then finally, pick your battles. I can't even emphasize, this needs to be like, oh, you know, I used to have a sign over my door that said, learn like a champion. And my kids would jump up and hit it only because they all had proprioceptive needs and they just needed to jump up and hit something. And so I put a really good message up there because I thought, well, if they're going to jump up and hit something, let's have them hit a good message. And this is what I need to put in the teacher's lounge. Choose your battles. Pick what absolutely, you know, Kate has emphasized, and that's what I respect so much about her as an educator and also as a parent, is that yes, there are rules in life. Yes, we need to absolutely say, this is where I draw the line in the sand, to say, we need to make sure that we are not doing this. However, there also has to be a choose your battles. And one of my battles will never be, I'm going to take you on over. If you're having a bad tic day, I'm going to send you out of the room. That's not my battle. My battle is, how do I help you stay in the room? How do I help communicate with other students for them? Because we all know that anything can become background noise if we allow it to. And if we teach kids, that's just who they are. That's just John, you know, and we just kind of shrug our shoulders and go, and our classroom would be less if John weren't here. Because John is an integral part of who we are as Gretchen Cole-Lade's classroom. And so to choose your battles, to say, you know, and that's what I love about Caden's heart, and what I have learned about Caden's heart just through observation, is that Caden has the biggest heart of any teenager I've ever met. I can work with anything with Caden because of that. And so to know that he struggles with disinhibition, okay, you know, that's where if Caden spouted off something, I think I honestly, as his teacher, I would look at him and kind of nod my head at him to say, I recognize that's disinhibition, let's move on. And we would just move on, because Caden takes that so hard. He knows what he's, and doesn't that break your heart that this is a kid who can't stop something? It's like blinking. Kate and her beautiful family has taught us that. And so why would we ever take on that battle with him? So choose your battles. Make sure everybody's nice. And as a teacher, teach kids in this classroom, in my four walls, kindness is going to prevail. And it doesn't, and that is a battle I'm willing to sink my flag in. So.
And I know we're running low on time. I just want to make a couple comments, then we'll move on to our next slide and be open for questions. When we're talking choosing the battles, I say this to Gretchen students all the time. I say it to other teachers. And parents, I know that there are things that we put on ignore. Why? Because I do it myself. I do it in the classroom. I do it with my children. I do it with my dogs. I do it with my husband. I do it in faculty meetings. Long story short, there are things that we just have to put on ignore. When we look to the root of the child, to the core of the child, to the heart of the child or the teenager or the adult, are they doing this because they are meaning to be cruel or disruptive or crack something? When we know that there is a diagnosis, always look to the core of the child, but really look and then figure out, okay, that's what it is. Okay, moving on. And that's one of the things that it can be a challenge to learn, but it is so worth it, because you will connect better with your students and connect better with the children. And that is just absolutely imperative. And before we get to our questions today, and I do appreciate you hanging in here with us, I want to talk about anxiety. And these are my children, Caden and Slada, and they both have anxiety. And anxiety takes many forms and has many faces, and my husband's anxiety and Caden's anxiety and Slada's anxiety and the anxiety of this teacher and that teacher and the person down the street can all be very, very different. You may see anxiety in high-performing students. We often talk about the stressors that high-performing students have been under, and especially because of COVID. And so, if somebody's stressing over a B, talk a little bit more. Well, we're talking beyond that. We may be talking about students who are high-performing and can really, really bust it out, but they're getting C's and D's and potentially F's because the anxiety stands in their way of getting the work done. They can't start it, and that all ties back in with executive function needs. Anxiety, as Caden likes to say, influences ticks. It becomes a nasty, ugly little loop. It influences the ticks influence it, and it goes faster and faster and faster. And in a brain that is like a race car, going so quickly and navigating so many different obstacles, the anxiety just springs up and it takes over. If you have experienced anxiety, please remember that your experiences may not be that of the child. And it drove us batty last year before the pandemic hit. How many times Caden would come home and say, well, I had an anxiety attack and this happened. And the teacher kept telling me, no, that's not anxiety. Well, for my kid, yeah, it was. And listen, I have struggled to understand what anxiety looks like in my children. Other than the passing anxiety, am I dressed appropriately? Am I prepared for my presentation type of anxiety? I've never experienced anxiety. And so coming in and having it, well, it's my anxiety. Well, you know what? If he's willing to label it, that means that there is something there. It means I need to put on my listening ears and take back my judgment, which is, yes, difficult to do sometimes. But when I empower my child or I empower a student in my classroom to tell me what they're experiencing, that means that I am going to grow and be a better person and a better professional for it. When we're talking about anxiety, a student may literally melt down. We may go happy, happy, joy, joy, boom, tears, aggravation, sorrow, cannot move through something in split seconds. And in my kid's case, it tends to happen as we get through the school day before we seem to have the relief of going home. It's not that the kids don't like the teacher, it's that they've hit their spot. Done, no more. How can we give them permission to done, no more, in a place that allows them to self-soothe, recover, and still hear what the teacher is saying and participate, at least by listening in the lesson. They may act up when they're under pressure. It's not because they are purposefully trying to do something. It's because their brains are going even more chaotic than they normally do. And they can't, it exacerbates the tics and it exacerbates this idea of self-control. Again, we're coming back into this executive functioning challenge, and anxiety just goes boom, 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 boom. I'm taking over. And it takes the control away from the child, which makes that anxiety ramp up. Anxiety is simply about the brain seeing a problem where there isn't one. Well, what do you mean you've got it? There's nothing wrong. What's your problem? No, the brain sees the problem. And so we have to acknowledge that since we can't talk directly to the brain and poke it and say, no, it doesn't work, we have to stop. Okay, can you tell me a little bit about the problem that you're seeing? And I don't know is a perfectly okay answer. Maybe with a follow-up of saying, okay, what can we do to help things get better? What can I do to help decrease the anxiety? And then when things have calmed down, or maybe the next day, if this comes up again, what is something I should do as the person in charge of the classroom, as the parent? What is something I should do to help you navigate this in a way that you feel comfortable? Calm down. Please, please. My husband learned hard lessons early in our marriage. Don't tell me to calm down. Don't. Number one, I already know that I've got an issue. I don't need to be told that you see an issue too. Let me work through it and ask, how can I help? How can I help? Gives me, helps me retain the power, as Gretchen talked about, and allows me to direct my own life. And anxiety, as this last bullet states, may show in anger or tears or frustration, lower grades, and an inability to verbally express what is wrong. Sometimes Caden has what we call selective mutism. He just can't spit it out. And sometimes we just have to give him the time. And that may be 5 minutes. But then eventually when he can start talking again, even if it's in jest with a friend, re-looping and, hey, Caden, it looks that you might be able to tell me something or talk to me a little bit more about it, not to frame something so that the child is at fault, but so, hey, I'd really like to learn more. And since it appears you can, and again, appears you can talk again, well, maybe they can talk in this, but they still need to avoid that. It's about developing a conversation and asking the child to help you as the adult expert. Ask the child to help you as the adult expert learn and grow and be better so that you can serve them to the best of your ability. All right, I know are out of time, so let me just wrap this really, really quickly. By now, we hope that you are able to describe how ADHD, anxiety, and executive function needs impact how students with Tourette learn and interact socially with peers in a classroom. We also hope that you are now able to implement and advocate for appropriate instructional teaching strategies to best support students with Tourette syndrome who struggle with ADHD, anxiety, and executive function needs. We hope that you have identified key takeaways. Students with Tourette syndrome who struggle with ADHD, anxiety, and executive function can indeed succeed in general education classes with appropriate supports. Educators of Tourette, students with Tourette, who struggle with ADD, anxiety, and executive function need to be able to implement a variety of instructional teaching strategies to best support their students. And parents of children with Tourette syndrome who struggle with, again, the ADHD, anxiety, and executive function needs must consistently advocate for their children and share ideas for best practices with the educators of their children. And thank you so much again for hanging in with us. We would happily take your questions now.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you, everybody who has been able to hang on and wait for the questions. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. The first one here says, one of the recommended executive functioning strategies is to reduce distractions around the room. For the last year, and our child and a million others has been receiving instruction through a screen where every manner of distraction, like the internet, is a click away. Any tips for how to reduce distractions under these circumstances? It seems impossible.
Gretchen, do you want to start with that one?
Wow, yes, that is such a great question. And I think honestly, this is going to be a whole new world, to quote one of the Disney movie songs, of how do we do this? And within assistive technology, there can be ways to make the device solely a dedicated device where the only thing it can do is go to Zoom. And so what I would recommend you do is contact your Assistive Technology Act, ACT Act program in your state. If it's in Oklahoma, it's the Oklahoma Able Tech. They would be able to help you kind of navigate that so that way, again, the phrase is dedicated device, where that's all it does. Because you're absolutely right. That's one of our challenges is that, I attended a workshop years ago, but the teacher taught from the back of a stadium seating classroom so she could see all of our screens because she wanted us all on the same, to not be surfing, the web while we were also attending class. So you're absolutely right. And then I think, again, this comes down to teaching kids impulsivity control. That to maybe even be able to set a timer. If you can't do a dedicated device, I would recommend setting a timer and saying to the kiddos, how long can you stay dedicated to this? I mean, we as adults have issues with this. And so, you know, I always wonder, like when I click off, do I stay on Zoom? Does my video stay on? And so I have to ask a friend via text, does it? And it does. And so, do you see what I'm saying? To help kids set goals of, you know, how long are you willing to and able to? And so that way then they kind of, you know, commit to, I'll stay on for 10 minutes, but then I need 5 minutes to just do Minecraft, to do whatever I want to do, and then I'll get back on. And then to advocate with the teacher to be able to do it. Because for goodness sakes, you know, we live in a day and age where this session is being recorded. You can come back and watch it again. Do you see what I'm saying? So that way, because this involves a different skill set for all of us. And so I would say, number one, check with your assistive tech ACT program within your state to see if there's something they can help you with. But do you see where also that kind of, as far as an educator goes, that goes against my teach kids how to deal? And teaching kids how to deal puts the power in their court to say, I'll stay on for 10 minutes, then I need to take a 5-minute break, then I'll come back to the recorded session or whatever it is. Because you're absolutely, I agree. It's one of our biggest, newest challenges. So Kate, do you have other ideas? Because you're a mom, you've dealt with this for the last year.
Well, you really covered it. And I think the thing is we might hear 10 minutes. 10 minutes? How are they going to get done in 10 minutes? You got to be kidding me. That's nothing. Guess what? 10 minutes of true focus is better than 30 minutes of half-assed focus. Take the 10, it's a win, and then come back to it after the break.
Thanks, Kate and Gretchen. Here's another one. I have a student that is inflexible when playing with peers or interacting with adults. He feels everyone needs to play by his rules or becomes irate, including physical aggression. He does not like direct instruction and insists on doing work by himself. His idea of compromise is, I am going to play the game with my rules and you can play by yours. Do you have any suggestions for scaffolding the teaching of flexibility?
So just really quick, Gretchen, before I want to make one real quick comment. Caden had issues where following rules was very, very important to him. Now, he never got so far as to get physical, but it drove him nuts. And so it really was about talking with him. Okay, it is important to you that people follow rules. So talk to me about, provide me some solutions that we can put into play when this doesn't happen, or when we need to transition so that it can happen better. And so asking for that student input is just what I wanted to touch on, because I have seen that with Caden. And Gretchen, this one is all you, my friend.
Okay. Wow. This question is right in my wheelhouse. I was blessed to work with a student from 3rd grade all the way through his senior year in high school. You've just described this student. And so number one, what I would say is we need to accept the fact that this child may view the world that way. I mean, some of us are good at playing games and some aren't. Remember how I said I don't like Jenga? Don't ask me to play Jenga. I will not play. I will do just about anything to get out of Jenga. And so I think number one, accepting the child for who they are, that the child, you know, is very firm in wanting to do it his or her way. What I would suggest in a classroom as an educator is this. You will always have in a classroom a child who's willing to play with just about anybody, you know, who has a kind heart, who you could meet with the two of them together and say, you know what, every Friday we play games. Would the two of you be willing to come together and play a game together? And I'll play with you, or I'll at least sit at the table and help be a facilitator of it, and then work on being able to play the game by the rules, like Kate said, but also be willing to kind of start compromising and teaching compromising. And one of the games that my student loved to play was, oh, I can't think of the name of it, but it was where you flipped up and it was everybody's picture, and then you would say, do they have a hat? and then you would drop down, and if they said no, you would drop down all the hats. I don't know if you remember that game. And then it was, is it a boy? You would drop down all the boys if the answer was no. And there were ways that you could very easily win that game. And so we would talk about that. We discussed how, you know what, if we ask this one question, man, we'd clear the table. We, you know, that crazy woman on that Housewives thing, you know, would dump the table. We would dump the table. And so we would talk about, how do we not dump the table? How do we stay at the table and continue learning? Now, what I would suggest is, again, you know, kind of going back to what we said in the very beginning, there isn't a magic strategy. It is consistently providing this child I would say, a very small opportunity to play a simple game, and, you know, and find the child's interest. You know, if the child is a very bright child, which it sounds like they are, if they want to play by their rules, so they have a very good understanding of themselves, they need to then be able to say, this is what I need in a game, and then try to find another child who's willing to play with them. It might take playing with, you know, I don't know how old the child is, but this might be, you know, in an elementary school, if this child is in 3rd grade, this is where I took over with my child, he was 3rd grade, we would bring in a 5th or a 6th grader who would be a little bit more mature and not take offense, but also kind of be a role model for this kiddo, because they're the cool kid. You know, this 3rd grader, regardless who they are, is going to look up to a 6th grader. Do you see what I'm saying? That there are lots of strategies you can do, very soft strategies. And then I think, bottom line, that we need to love and accept who this child is, and realize that, you know, I love games. I love games. They teach social skills. But there are other ways to teach social skills other than a game. And so I would never want to bring this child down because they can't play a game, okay? That maybe they could be in charge of supervising during a game session. Do you see what I'm saying? That can we find a skill for them to do while we still also try to teach it? But I will tell you, I had this student from the time he was 3rd grade until he was 12. By the time he was in 12th grade, we'd stop playing games. On game day, he would be my helper. He would help facilitate making sure because you know what? He knew where all the games were. He knew if any game pieces were missing. He knew where those game pieces needed to be stored. I put myself out of business because he helped me with that. And he brought a talent and a gift to the classroom. So.
Thank you, Kate and Gretchen, for a wonderful presentation today. We do have a few more questions. I want all of our attendees to know that we will answer those questions after in a follow-up email. We do have everybody's email, and we'll be sure to answer the rest of the questions. That is all the time that we have for this session. Again, thank you for those who have stayed on. Once the session is closed, you'll receive a survey on the presentation. We'd greatly appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. That email won't contain answer to the questions. It will be a different email that will come after that with answers to the questions. Additionally, the webinar will be posted on our Tourette Association of America YouTube page. That is, you can Google that and find that for a lot of great webinar resources. For those who weren't able to participate today or want to view any of the webinars later, we encourage you to reach out to us about this webinar for other resources and opportunities to connect. On behalf of the Tourette Association of America, thank you again for joining us and taking the time to view our presentation. This presentation was presented free of charge thanks to our generous donors. If you appreciated this session, we welcome you to support the organization. May 15th starts Tourette Awareness Month, and we welcome everyone to get out and get active through Miles for Tourette. Visit us at tourette.org to learn more and to give. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Kate and Gretchen. Have a great evening.
All right. Wendy, thanks, Emma. Bye, everyone.